Barack Obama. Abraham Lincoln said that a house divided cannot stand. We cannot have a nation that is half slave and half free. This was a turning point in his thinking. He realized that in his political life, he would have to speak against slavery in a stronger and more controversial way. Allen C. Guelzo. Lincoln began to travel across the state and invited Stephen A. Douglas to a series of joint debates. Douglas wrote back and said, "I have no duty to meet with you in joint debates. I am the current senator. I am the most famous politician in America at this moment. Why should I share a platform with you?" But Douglas could not resist. Applause. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate you. Doris Kearns. Goodwin. Douglas arrived as the champion. He came by train with a special decorated car. He brought servants and secretaries with him. Ma'am, good to see you. Doris Kearns. Goodwin. And Lincoln had to walk from one debate place to another. The reputations of Lincoln and Douglas were both at stake here. They were actually setting up the conflict that would divide the nation. When we were both young men, no one could beat him in wrestling or in a foot race or in running his grocery store. We served together in the state legislature. Then Mr. Lincoln disappeared for a while until he appeared again in the respected halls of Congress. There, he made himself known by opposing the war with Mexico and taking the side of the common enemy against his own country. Booing. And then he disappeared again. He returned again in 1854, this time working with Frederick Douglass and his abolitionist friends, just in time to create this Black Republican platform. Booing. That's right, Douglas. Hit him again. Lincoln, you have two faces. Laughter. If I had two faces, do you think I would be wearing this one? Laughter. Doris Kearns. Goodwin. This old rivalry had finally come back. Very good. Very good. Doris Kearns. Goodwin. Lincoln felt that his life had been a flat failure compared to Douglas. Douglas had gone much further than he had, and now they were running against each other for the Senate. Now, I am no giant like Judge Douglas. I am only a simple man. His ambition goes far beyond mine. His party expects him to become president one day. Then they will all enjoy the rewards of his greatness. But no one has ever looked at my thin, tall face and expected me to become president. Laughter. Doris Kearns. Goodwin. People came to these debates with the same excitement and passion that people bring to big sporting events today. But these debates were far more important than any sporting event. I am here to talk about basics, principles. If the Negro is a man, then my long-held belief teaches that all men are created equal, and there can be no moral right for one man to make another man a slave. Applause. Well, let's talk about principles. I care more about the great principle of self-government, the right of people to rule themselves, than I do about all the Negroes in Christendom. When a white man governs himself, that is self-government. But when he governs himself and also governs another man, that is more than self-government. That is despotism. Mr. Lincoln and his followers want equality for Negroes in everything. If they get their way, Negroes and whites will be allowed to marry. Negroes will serve on juries. Negroes will vote. Booing Christy Coleman. During these debates, Lincoln was not an abolitionist at all, but, without meaning to, he was making arguments similar to theirs as he searched for logic in the Constitution. Ted Widmer. He even went back to the ideas of Euclid. Euclid was all about proving something without any doubt. Lincoln used this method to break the weak arguments that supported slavery. Christy Coleman. But like many people of that time, He strongly believed that black people were inferior, whether they were enslaved or free. Just because I believe the Negro should be free does not mean I want to marry one. As a nation, we began by declaring that all men are created equal. Now we almost read it as, all men are created equal except Negroes. Soon it may say, all men are created equal except Negroes and foreigners and Catholics. Negroes, like many other men, may not be equal in every way. But if they are men, they deserve the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Applause. The real issue, which will remain long after Judge Douglas and I are silent, is the endless struggle between two principles, between right and wrong. Applause. Christy Coleman. What Lincoln did so brilliantly was take the key words from the Declaration of Independence and turn them into the moral compass of the nation. He combined that with the Constitution and with Scripture. It became a very powerful argument. Doris Kearns. Goodwin. This is where Lincoln built his reputation, one debate after another. Everything in his life had prepared him for the talents he showed in these debates. He told stories. He was funny. He could speak philosophically. He could speak politically. Ted Widmer. The Lincoln-Douglas debates helped Lincoln. They raised his reputation and made him much more well-known. But he still lost the election. Carrie Lattimore. One amazing thing about Lincoln is that he lost many times. But great people in life take a loss and come back stronger. Doris Kearns Goodwin. Even though he lost this election, the defeat again became a platform for him to grow. Under it all was his deep passion for the cause against slavery, which was reaching a breaking point. Rhesus Keir Twains. Goodwin. On the day of the general election, he was restless all day. He was so used to disappointment that he feared something bad would happen again. Around 9 o'clock, he, Judge Davis, and friends went to the telegraph office to hear the results. Finally, at midnight, the news came that New York had voted Republican. Church bells rang, and people gathered in the streets. This new man had won. He ran home to tell Mary and famously said, "Mary, Mary, we are elected." Clint Smith. Southern. States had been saying that if this man was elected, they would have no choice but to leave the Union. As soon as he was elected, South Carolina decided to hold a secession convention. By December 1860, they decided to leave the Union. Barton A. Myers. By February 1861, 7 U.S. states had seceded. The Confederate government was formed and placed Jefferson Davis as president. Christy Coleman. They were leaving for one reason only, to protect and expand slavery. Harold Holzer. Lincoln believed, maybe too optimistically, that there was still a way to bring the Southern slave states back into the Union once he reached Washington. Ted Widmer. On February 11, 1861, Lincoln began his train journey to Washington, D.C. It would have been easier to take the shortest route, but he could not travel through Kentucky, where he was born, or through Virginia, because it was too dangerous. He wrote to a friend that he feared he might be lynched. So he had to take a long, winding route of more than 1,100 miles. Wherever Lincoln arrived, crowds came out to see him. Carrie Lattimore. There was hope, but also fear. People knew that Southern states had already left the Union. These were dangerous times, and there were real assassination threats against Lincoln. Ted Widmer. Intelligence reports said there was a major conspiracy to assassinate him when he passed through Baltimore. The plot leader used a system of drawing lots, pieces of paper with red dots. Those who picked a red dot would try to kill Lincoln with guns, knives, and grenades. But Allan Pinkerton, a railroad detective, discovered the conspiracy using undercover. agents. Davis. Mr. Pinkerton, it's all true. Anyone who picked a red dot is an assassin. How many have red dots? 8. That is worse than I thought. Is the door locked from the inside? Yes, ma'am. Key, please. My uncle is ill. He needs complete privacy. Do you understand? Dramatic music playing. We will take a special overnight train. I have cleared the tracks and cut the telegraph lines from here to Baltimore. These men plan to create a distraction with the police and trap you to death. That's all? Like Julius, Caesar. You must take this seriously, Abe. You have powerful enemies. If I sneak into the capital out of fear, good people will also have reason to fear. Sir, the worst thing that could happen is that you never reach Washington. You cannot risk being recognized. Take care of it. Dramatic music playing. This is my associate, Miss Key Warren. Mr. Lincoln, it is an honor. Miss Warren, I am far too plain to pretend to be your uncle. Not at all, sir. I believe ordinary people are the best looking. That is why the Lord made so many of us train whistles. Well, this is not how I plan to arrive in Washington. Harold Holzer. Lincoln traveled from Harrisburg to Philadelphia to Baltimore, and finally to Washington at night, secretly wearing a disguise. He arrived in Washington at 6:01 a.m. without any announcement. The press mocked him and drew cartoons, showing him in strange disguises, even wearing kilts and dancing the McClinton Highland Fling. This was not good for a president coming to Washington to show courage. Frederick Douglass said that now Mr. Lincoln understood what it felt like to travel on the Underground Railroad. Edna Green Medford. When Lincoln became president and gave his first inaugural speech, African Americans waited with great anticipation to hear what he would say. By that time, 7 states had already left the Union. African Americans believed this might be their chance to end slavery. They had a Republican president now. He was not an abolitionist, but many Republicans were ready to act against those who had betrayed the country. Mary Frances Berry. His first inaugural speech came at a moment full of tension. Harold Holzer. There were still serious fears of assassination. Abraham Lincoln. Citizens of the United States, the great issue of civil war is in your hands, my dissatisfied countrymen, and not in mine. Harold Holzer. Lincoln wanted the speech to be strong, but not threatening. He hoped to stop the wave of secession. The government will not attack you. There can be no conflict unless you choose to start it. Harold Holzer. He said federal forts and armories would be protected. At the same time, he promised to enforce the hated fugitive slave law. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained our bonds, it must not break them. Harold Holzer. Lincoln showed this speech to William H. Seward, who suggested changes. The ending originally asked the South to choose between peace or the sword. Seward said it should not end that way and suggested a new idea. Lincoln then turned Seward's idea into powerful poetry. The mystic chords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every heart and home across this land will one day rise again in the chorus of the Union when touched by the better angels of our nature. Applause. Harold Holzer. In July 1861, only a few months after the attack on Battle of Fort Sumter, Union forces under Irvin McDowell marched south into northern Virginia for the first major battle of the war. The battle took place near the town of Manassas. It was also called the First Battle of Bull Run because of a nearby creek on the battlefield. Doug Dowds. Lincoln believed the war might be decided in this one battle. Either the South would win, independence, or the North would crush the rebellion. Both armies were inexperienced. When Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to stop the rebellion, their service was limited to 3 months. That was how things had always been done. Farmers would take their muskets from above the fireplace, fight the war, and then return home to farming when it ended. Doug Dowds. Lincoln knew his soldiers were poorly trained, but politically, it would have looked terrible to send them home without using them in battle. So Lincoln and other leaders pushed the Union Army to move forward and fight. Caroline E. Janney. Even though it seems strange today, many people felt excitement about the war. They had never seen a real battlefield. They only knew war through paintings and drawings. They thought soldiers stood in lines and fired at each other, and that it must be somewhat safe. Some people even brought picnic baskets in wagons to watch the battle from the hills. Timothy B. Smith. Congressmen, senators, and wealthy people from Washington came to watch. It was a huge spectacle. It was entertainment for them. Caroline E. Janney. Many believed this might be the only battle of the war. The Union Army crossed the creek and attacked the strong Confederate forces. Even during these hard times of war, we must remain strong and keep our faith in Him. Sir, news from the battlefield. Doug Dowds. Lincoln waited to hear the results. At first, the Union Army seemed to be winning in the morning. After church, Lincoln spent the rest of the day in the telegraph office. This became his main source of information. Tom Wheeler. The invention of the telegraph, which Lincoln called lightning messages, changed how information moved. Suddenly, news from one place could reach another place almost instantly. Stan McChrystal. Before that, reports arrived only every few weeks. Military leaders had almost complete independence in the field. Now, Lincoln was connected to them by a wire. Harold Holzer. The day began very well for the Union. They pushed Confederate forces back, but late in the afternoon, Confederate troops launched a counterattack. Tom Wheeler. General McDowell had a good plan, but his army was inexperienced and struggled to move properly during the battle. The South had similar problems, but they were lucky because trains brought reinforcements to the battlefield at a critical moment. Greg Jackson. Federal soldiers heard the terrifying rebel yell, a loud, high-pitched scream. Union soldiers described it as something from another world. It had a powerful effect. Caroline E. Janney. The Confederates began pushing the Union Army back. Federal troops rushed across the creek in panic. They were completely defeated. Harold Holzer. Citizens from Washington who had come with picnic baskets to watch the battle suddenly saw the battle turn. Their baskets were overturned as they ran away in chaos. Union soldiers marched back in the hot July heat, humiliated. Tom Wheeler. For Lincoln, the defeat was not something far away. He saw wounded and defeated soldiers returning to the capital. Some had even thrown away their weapons. The disaster became real. You could see it. You could smell it. What does McDowell say? That the day is lost. Music playing. It was probably Lincoln's first military mistake. On that day, Lincoln realized the war would not be short. It would be a long and difficult war.